The problem in many African countries, all candidates always have one speech, the victory speech. I have a problem with the situations where a president is sworn in while there is a dispute, because it then becomes very difficult and very dangerous actually to nullify an election.
That's very true.
And I see that that is the situation here in Malawi. I see that that was the situation in Nigeria until they handed down a judgment, which I think was very well written. And that was also the situation in Zimbabwe. So going forward, I hope that the Malawians and particularly the opposition party will allow the legal process to go through. Once it goes through, then there is the very painful process of accepting a result that you don't agree with, that does not favor you. Yes. But it is important. I've always said that when you are in the political arena, particularly when you are a candidate in the presidential race, you must have two speeches. One that concedes defeat and one that acknowledges victory and celebrates it.
You see, there have been cases where people will call to congratulate the other one of winning, and then they realize that, oh, there were some irregularities, and then they start saying, oh, wait a minute, but I already called, I already congratulated him, and then I have to go and call again and say, wait a minute, can you hold, because I think we still have to sort out this. But that's just on the lighter note. But questions that people have asked is, should the judiciary really be involved in deciding the result of an election? Because, I mean, as the way it is designed, it's the will of the people who went to vote to elect a leader. And isn't it a bit sad or regrettable that things should get to a point where people should sit in a court of law and start deciding whether who won or who did not win? It should have been just the people deciding who has won.
In a perfect world, what you say is the desirable thing, that if you have an electoral body that conducts its affairs in an open and transparent manner, and the processes are transparent and all the parties agree that they are processes. Remember that election is not an event. Election is a process. The voting day is one of the stages of the process. It starts with registration. Is registration credible? Is the electoral register credible? Are the agents allowed access so that when there is a result, they sign against it? Are the results credible? Are they announced in an open and credible manner? If you do that, as we see in countries which we can cite, you go to countries such as Israel. I mean, election is called in the morning, in the evening, within 2 hours, you know what the results are. Yep. You go to countries such as Norway. But in Africa, we have this, it's sad for me to use the word tradition, but I'm saying that it's getting established as a tradition, that whenever there is an election, people always contest the result and nobody accepts victory. And that is very dangerous for a country, because what it does, particularly in our countries which are multi-ethnic, is that leaders then resort to very primordial ways of appealing to the ethnic sensibilities of people from their base. And that undermines the economy. So in a short, sharp answer to your question, in a perfect world, if elections are conducted properly, the judiciary may have no place. But because we know we don't live in a perfect world, and we know that the judiciaries we have put together are for dispute resolution, if a dispute does arise and we accept the judiciary is independent, functionally independent, and capable of discharging justice without fear or favor, then they should be the final arbiter. It is not true that we must agree with the results of a judicial process, but for the sake of good order, if there is a well-reasoned finding by a court of law, it is incumbent upon all parties to deal with at that level. But that does not mean that the political class cannot go beyond and above the judiciary and say, I have the result, but for the good health of the nation, me as the leader who is now elected and endorsed by the judiciary, I'm now reaching out to you, the opposition, because I know that you have a constituency. Let us build our country together. That is great if countries can do that.
That would be great. But
yes.
This is the first time that such a thing is happening in Malawi, and obviously there are mixed feelings about what's going on. Some people think, why bother go to the courts at all? This is like, you're just sore losers. Just accept that you have lost and let's move on. But some say, no, if an injustice is perceived to have been done, let's follow it up and make sure that everything is properly tied up, and then we have closure on this matter. I don't know what you think about that.
I respect anybody who uses existing dispute resolution mechanisms, because if they did not expect institution, they would do something that is a lot nastier. So when you see somebody saying that I'm dissatisfied and I'm going to a court of law, we must respect that individual, because he's saying I'm using the processes and the channels that are provided by the law. That is a law-abiding citizen who must be celebrated. In other countries, they would declare guerrilla warfare, which would hurt everybody. So let us celebrate the opposition in Malawi for acknowledging that there is a judicial process, and that judicial process is provided for in the law and in the constitution, and that we've got to follow it.
Who polices the police? In this case, the judiciary. How sure are we going to be? You see, Malawi is in a peculiar situation where we do place a lot of trust in the judiciary. But what if the judiciary makes a mistake?
Don't lose the trust. The mere fact that a finding has been made by a court of law which is not in your favor does not mean that they have made a mistake. Not everything must always be in your favor. And remember that courts of law and judges decide cases on the basis of the evidence that is placed before them.
Yes.
If the evidence that is placed before them is of such a nature as to demonstrate that there were irregularities in an election, but those irregularities are not sufficient to order that the elections were improperly held, then that is the result. In fact, let me tell you, there is not a single election anywhere in the world that is 100% perfect. If you find such an election, that is rigged. A perfect election is a rigged election. A proper election will always have irregularities. Some voter did not have their name in the register. There was overcounting or undercounting. But the critical question is, are the irregularities of such a nature as to amount to irregularities that ensure that the will of the people is not reflected? If the will of the people is still reflected and credible, the irregularities notwithstanding, then a court of law ought not to disturb an election result. One of the things that I've discovered in life is that the honest are the most endangered sometimes, because honest people don't have and don't engage in very sophisticated schemes. They sign things in honesty, they sign things, sometimes they are naive. And when the law is just the law, sometimes you punish people who ought not to be punished, and the real culprits are left to go. So I'm one who is very reluctant to accuse people without any reason, because you can also be accused falsely.
Did anything come to a proper conclusion? Did you have any high-profile convictions for that?
No, this is the other mistake that people make.
Yes.
In a typical when you are when you are dealing with corruption, these are white-collar crimes, and history has demonstrated that first of all, we don't prosecute.
Okay.
The Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission did not have prosecutorial powers. You only have investigation powers. So you don't prosecute, and you are not the judiciary. The most important thing is that people also forget that in the fight against corruption is not just prosecution. It is education. People never ask, did you educate the people? And did they change? That is the major plank in the fight against corruption. Did you work with institutions so that they reduce opportunities for corruption? People are obsessed with prosecution. But how many people can you prosecute? If you are a population of 50 million, even if you prosecuted 10, you don't solve the problem. But if you create an environment where a critical mass of the people then begin to believe and to participate in processes that reduce corruption, then that is what is desirable. So sometimes we in Africa, we want to see blood. We want to see people who are in high positions brought down so that we may celebrate their downfall. But the truth is, what we ought to be doing is to create societies where corruption is the exception other than the rule.
Why we want to see those people brought down is because of the bitterness that the downtrodden people have. That those people in those high places are the ones looting the economy.
Yes.
And the belief that they're involved in a lot of corrupt practices.
Yes.
And if those people were brought down, that would be conceived to be justice. And then people would start having fear. Because if you bring down that person, then anybody down there is going to be afraid to do the same
I
thing.
can't agree with you more, but when they are seeking votes, why do you ask them for money? Where do you expect them to get money? If you, the electorate, also don't want to exercise your voting right and you expect people to pay you 200 kwacha or 1,000 kwacha, where do you expect them to get the money? We, the electorate, must also ask ourselves, what is our role in making people engage in corrupt practices? When we make demands of people, you know somebody is earning 20,000 kwacha, and when you call them to a church function, you ask them to contribute 50,000, and the next mosque asks for 100,000, and you want them to send people to school at 100,000, where do you expect them? Sometimes the people also put their political leaders in a corner, and therefore they support them even when they engage in graft. So it is true that when you are entrusted with public office, you ought not to use it for personal benefit, but we must also ask ourselves, what is our own contribution to perpetuating the culture of corruption? In the United States of America, when somebody seeks public office, it is the people who donate for them to participate in the electoral process. In Africa, people expect people to buy them chitenge. Well, how do they buy chitenge? From which money? You expect to be entertained. From which money? You expect when somebody is elected into public office, you expect them to buy a Mercedes-Benz. When they come in a bicycle, you say they are stupid. So we too, in Africa, must change our attitude.
You have been at the helm of a very powerful institution in a big country in Africa, one of the leading economies, fighting corruption and graft. Tell me about your experience. Would we ever come any close to winning this war against corruption?
Yes.
Would we?
Yes.
I tend to think that at a certain level, you're dealing with very sophisticated and powerful enemies, and they will just make it extremely difficult for you to do anything, to a point where you are resigned to your fate and say,
let me tell you, let's look at Africa positively. During my own lifetime, I've seen countries take action in a manner that informs me that Africa is changing. I've seen in a country such as Rwanda, the leadership and the presidency take action to make the corruption the exception other than the rule. You go to Kigali in Rwanda and attempt to bribe a police officer, they'll arrest you.
Will they?
Yes. Within 25 years. That is culture change. Go to Tanzania and see what is happening there right now. Go to South Africa. You can see a former president facing the law. Go to Nigeria. We have seen things happening. In other words, as we tell the sad story of Africa, we must also look at the other side of the coin. Africa is progressively moving into an arena where in the next 50 or so years, corruption will be the exception other than the rule. We have seen a whole government brought down in Sudan because the people said, we don't want a corrupt regime. We saw a whole government come down in Algeria, in Tunisia, and in Egypt. Things are happening. So countries, and particularly those in the political leadership, must now be warned. In Kiswahili, they say that when you see your neighbor being shaved, you put water on your head because it is you next.
For you next.
If you see Sudan rising up because they are dissatisfied, the neighbors must also begin to do things that will change and make unnecessary a change that is not orderly.
Comrade Robert Mugabe has brought home a poignant reminder of African leaders who seem to fly outside their countries to seek social services that are not available in their country. Not a bad thing in itself, but when it seems to become a pattern or a habit, it becomes a bit worrying. He died in Singapore. He's not the first African president to die outside his country. Not the first senior government official to fly outside Africa to seek services. And this must be quite worrying to us as Africans, I think.
It is an indictment of particularly those in political leadership that we preside over institutions in which we have no faith. That as a president we have a whole Ministry of Health which is presiding over hospitals which we ourselves do not have faith in and can dare not attend. That we preside over education systems in which we can never allow our children to attend. It is a big indictment, particularly when you've had the opportunity of presiding over a government, when you took over government on the basis that you are going to address issues of health, issues of education. It's very sad.
Food.
Very sad, and you have doctors in your country who are highly trained. It is something that is to be condemned.
It has to be condemned in the strongest terms, and some have, running out of ideas, suggested that maybe we should pass a law that says no child of a senior government official should go and attend education outside the country. And I said, well, in a democracy, that might be a bit difficult. Yeah. But you see people trying to say, how do we manage this? They have the money, they have the wherewithal to go and get the services that they don't have here at home. But where does that leave us, the plebeians?
Perhaps they don't mean it, but it is a demonstration of their dissatisfaction. They are saying, we have given you the honor and privilege of serving with our resources. You have the opportunity to improve the quality of those services, and you don't, because you don't eat from the same pot. And they are saying, therefore, we'll prevent you from going to another pot which is made by other civilization. And I think a good leader, those in positions of leadership, should hear those messages loud and clear, that people are beginning to say, we are not going to accept this kind of situation. When President Mandela was unwell, because he inherited good medical services from the erstwhile apartheid rulers, fact, although apartheid was a crime against humanity.
Oh, yeah.
Those Afrikaners made for themselves things that worked for them. He didn't have to go outside of the country, and it can be done. We have the resources, we have the wherewithal, and therefore I think the time has come that we must improve our circumstances. We must ensure that our health systems are sound. We must ensure that our education systems are sound. We must ensure that we run institutions that serve us well and are world class.
They say leaders or rulers are just as bad as the people that put them in power. Probably this reflects on all of us as a people, that maybe this is what we are. Maybe we should just stop whining and complaining. After all, this is what we deserve. We are the ones who shape these leaders. I mean, look at Malawi, for example. Apart from, from 1964, we have been led by indigenous presidents. Kamuzu spent quite a great deal of time outside the country. But after that, we had Bakiri Muluzi, and then we had Bingu Mutarika, we had Joyce Banda, we had Peter Mutarika. All these are presidents that we have raised here in our country. And maybe this is what we are.
Not necessarily. I think it is easy to say that that is our problem, that the leaders get, or that the people get the leaders that they deserve. There is merit to a certain extent, particularly when people vote on the basis of ethnicity.
Yes.
Then you get wrong people. You elect people because they come from your tribe, or you vote on the basis of being bribed, then you get people who are manipulative. But there is a sense in which it is also the role of men and women who offer themselves as leaders to ensure that they have a vision, because when people go to the electorate to seek their mandate, they normally say, this is what we are going to do for you. And this is my point, that the population must make demand of leaders. I saw a clip from India, whether it's true or not, but whether it's dramatized or true, but I liked it. There's a politician who had promised the electorate that he would build a bridge. I'm sure you saw it.
I saw it.
And the circle went,
they said, come
there
here,
was no bridge.
Come here,
took him
let's show you where you said you build walk on your bridge.
Perhaps that is what we should do. If we do that often enough, then the
walk
leaders will know.
Bridge.
We are not going to joke with people who come here and tell us cock and bull stories, then they don't deliver.
Do you think Africa needs benevolent dictators?
You know,
people who are going to say, I know what's good for you, and I won't take no for an answer. This is what you go and do.
You know, I was at a conference, and somebody during the question and answer sessions rose up and said, you are one of the greatest supporters of dictators in Africa. And I asked them, which ones? They told me, you support Paul Kagame, who is a dictator. I responded, Paul Kagame is not a dictator, he's a disciplinarian. Then they told me, you support John Pombe Magufuli, who is a dictator. I said, no, he's recreating order, he's a disciplinarian. Then they told me, you are supporting Yoweri Museveni, who is a dictator. I said, no, he may have overstayed longer than I wanted him to stay, but let us ask ourselves where he took Uganda from. So there is
it's an issue of semantics, I think. Well, they are dictators. You can always find a good synonym.
My own view is that each country has its own unique circumstances and history. And that when you are talking about dictatorship or democracy, we must ask ourselves, what do we mean? And my understanding of democracy is that democracy should create an environment where people participate in an open and transparent manner, and they have the opportunity to elect their leaders. And that when such individuals have been elected, there must be people who are firm, who have clarity of vision, and implement and ensure that those are implemented. I'm also one who believes that leadership ought to renew itself. That's why I'm a supporter of presidential term limits. Because I think that if you are a good leader, you should serve for a maximum of 10 years, not because you have nothing to offer. You have something to offer, but also give others an opportunity to serve, and you become a repository from whom wisdom can be drawn. And when change happens in that way, it renews itself, just like in the ocean, waves renew the ocean, so do new ideas renew other settled ideas.
Let's talk about something a little bit different, but not very different from what we're talking about. And that's the position that most people hold, especially in Africa. And when I'm talking about Africa, the running point for me is Malawi. Malawians don't seem to attach a lot of importance or their lives to the taxes that they pay, to an extent where when public resources are perceived to have been looted, you don't really get the anger that you'd expect to get from someone who probably has been robbed of their money and they've caught the one who did that. And it's markedly different from other countries where people really want to know where their taxes have gone and what projects they're funding and how the money is being run. And even governments are right eyes on the ball. Where is this money going and what is it doing? But you come back here, well, it's like, well, they looted, they took those billions, and then we move on.
You know, when we were young, I do not know whether it still happens here in Malawi, but I remember we had a subject in school called civics.
Civics, we had that.
And civics taught school children that the government does not have money of its own. When you go to a shop and you buy an item, there is an element of tax. That is what then is used to build roads. That is when you are working and we take certain taxes. That is the relationship that must be taught so that Africans are able to appreciate that governments do not have money which they print, which is independent of taxes. Once they appreciate that, like they now do in most of Asia and in most of Europe, then they will ask people to account. When people know that the money you are playing about with is theirs, then they'll become the guardians of that money. And it is only in Africa that somebody comes here and says, I've built you a road. From which money? It is our taxes. You, as a friend of mine has said, and I see it in the social media, whenever you go into an ATM machine and you ask for money, it gives you, do you thank the ATM machine, thank you ATM because you have given me the money? No. The money that you've taken from the ATM machine is your money. So it is with our governments. The people must have and understand that there is a linkage between the taxes they pay and the money that public officials use for purposes of development, economic and otherwise. And when they do that, they'll begin to be the guardians and custodians, and they'll be angry when they see somebody in their rural village who earns a quarter of what he's spending money in the billions to build a mansion which they cannot account for.
a thin line there, because some people say, well, let him be. I mean, it's he's got his own ways of making money. You're just being jealous.
Well, that's what will always be said. I mean, that is, if anybody says that, is because they are ignorant. And when you remove the cataract of ignorance from their very eyes, they'll see that it is them who are ignorant and that the other person was taking advantage.
There was a time when there was a scramble for Africa, and as a voracious reader, you must know very well about this. And we fought and we got our countries back, and we thought we had the independence. Fast forward to 2000 and beyond, it doesn't look like we never really reclaimed our territories. Now you see even more than before foreigners coming and taking over African land. As we are speaking, you don't need to walk more than 5 kilometers before you meet a Chinese investor in your neighborhood. And those are not the only ones. Everyone seems to be coming back to scramble for Africa. And people are saying, were we ever free from those colonialists?
Africa, the world has always scrambled for Africa.
Yes.
The Arabs scrambled for Africa, the Portuguese and the Spaniards scrambled for Africa, the entire European continent scrambled for Africa and partitioned her. First, they scrambled for people during slavery, they scrambled for resources during colonization. They left, but never quite left, because they left the colonials, the neo-colonial state. They structured them in a manner that they can exploit them. China has now realized that Africa is where the resources are, and China is the one continent that still has arable land. So they are coming. But the truth be told, the world is still governed by the law of the jungle, survival of the fittest and the dying of the least suitable. If Africans are not organized, we'll be gobbled up in the name of trade. You see, what China is doing is that China knows what it wants. It knows that it has a population of 1.4 billion. It is a country that has an appetite for resources. You only have to read Zambia's Dambisa Felicia Moyo's book, The Rise of China, Winner Take All.
Yes.
China's appetite for natural resources. That is not the subtitle, but effectively that is what she says. And she's saying that China is going to be here. China is thinking about her population and how she's going to feed that population. We too must now begin to think, how are we going to feed our population? How are we going to immunize ourselves against foreign domination, so that when we relate to China on the basis of trade, real trade. When we relate to Europe or America, we relate on the basis of real trade. Because what we call trade now is not trade. You see, Julius Nyerere put it so figuratively that when you talk about trade or equal opportunity between Africa, he said that even in boxing,
yes,
when you are asking people to fight, you don't put a lightweight and a heavyweight. No. That is murder. Yeah. You put a lightweight and a lightweight, a middleweight and a middleweight, and a featherweight and a featherweight. But Africa must style up. If we are not very careful, in the next 20 years, China will dominate all sectors of our economy, and I won't blame them. I'll blame us. We have the intellect, we have the know-how, we have the exposure. We must say that certain things must not be imported. And I'm very happy that in East Africa, for example, in the last 1 year, we said we are not importing second-hand clothing. Kenya and
Rwanda
Uganda
did
have
the same
not,
thing as well.
It was in the context of East Africa.
Yes.
It is only Rwanda that has implemented. Kenya and Uganda have not.
They're because, like, okay, you go ahead.
Yeah, because if you don't stop that, how will we grow our textile industry?
Exactly.
If we don't add value to our resources, how are we going to develop? If we are only engaged in producing primary resources, we must begin to make our mobile phone. Right now, the world is meeting in Stuttgart to showcase motor vehicles that are no longer going to use fossil fuel. And as you look across Africa, every African country is discovering oil at the wrong time. Yes. Everybody is migrating away from fossil fuel, going into electricity, going into solar energy. In the next 20 years, countries will no longer be producing cars that run on fossil fuel, and those cars will be dumped in Africa. We must also begin to think about producing, and I'm happy with the University of Makerere that they actually produce a prototype of a solar-driven bus. Those are the things that I want to hear about. But we must style up. If we don't style up, you and me, your Job. What is your Christian name?
Joab.
Joab.
J-O-A-B.
Yes.
Joab.
What will happen is that your child will be called Deng Xiaoping. Will
Not
be
a very
baptized.
bad name, but still. I would know how to shorten that name. That's my only
You
worry.
call it Deng.
Deng. Deng would be like D-U-N-G. Well, that's not a very cool thing.
So I'm saying that in jest, but I'm simply trying to say that we will be dominated culturally, economically, and politically. So we have no excuse now. We have the intellect, we have the exposure, we have the experience, we have the ability to liberate ourselves and to operate and work with other peoples of the world, including China, on an equal footing.
The things you do, talking about graft and corruption, and I think that's possibly the major thing that you came here to do at this particular conference in Malawi. Do they amount to much? Will they change anything at all?
No, they may not amount to what others who are in the process of looking for faults think much. But if you ask the ocean, what makes you the ocean, it will tell you the droplets. The droplets in the millions amount to much. I remember these words of Kenya's Ali Mazrui during the days of apartheid regime. He was asked, how are you contributing to the collapse of the apartheid regime? And he said, the only thing that I do, because this is the only thing that I can do, is that I never buy any apples from South Africa. That is my contribution. Let others make their contribution. My contribution is to say what I believe in, to move across Africa when I'm given the opportunity, and like John the Baptist to be found in the Bible, to shout in the wilderness. As to whether my voice will be heard, that is not for me to say. But as I walk across Africa, out of every 10 people that I talk to, I see 2 who think that I'm making sense. And that to me is satisfying.
You've quoted scripture several times, I
Yes.
think now. Are you a spiritual man?
Yes, I am. I believe that one cannot do the things that one does without having faith in God. And I'm not one who is impressed by denominations.
Okay.
Because Christ was not a Christian, God is not a Christian. But I profess to be of the Christian faith.
As Africa, we are not a very united bloc, and that's putting us at a disadvantage and open to people who might want to take advantage of us. And examples are given of, look at the United States of America, they're united as one. And I'm like, well, I don't know if it could work for Africa. I don't know what you think about it.
It can, and I'm a passionate believer. I belong to an organization called State 55,
Okay.
which is a group of Africans across the continent now that are beginning to talk very seriously. What is it that we can do in practical terms to move towards the greater integration of Africa? And if you look at even Africa Agenda 2063, if you look at one of the pillars, I think it is the second pillar, one of the pillars of the 7 aspiration, is strengthening Africa for purpose, from a pan-African perspective, to bring about African renaissance. And we are not being naive. We don't believe, at least I don't believe, that it is going to happen suddenly, perhaps even in my lifetime. But I believe that everybody now appreciates that one of our weaknesses is that we are too divided, our economies are too small, and because we are too small, we are easy to manipulate. And we are saying, but even if we did not have political integration in the manner that you have in the United States, can we do a number of things? One, ensure that we have free movement of people. African Continental Free Trade Area signed in Kigali,
Yes.
in Rwanda in the year 2017, I believe, is one of the things that we are doing. And if you want to look at it even from a regional standpoint, what is happening in SADC, what is happening in COMESA, what is happening in East African Community, what is happening in IGAD, what is happening in ECOWAS, what is happening in the Maghreb, we are moving in that direction. If you look at what is happening in ECOWAS, they now say that by the year 2020, they'll have a single currency called ECO. Even if they don't have it by 2020, the fact that they are working towards it is a good thing. You come to East Africa, we are thinking about political federation, and we are thinking about a common currency. And I believe that these are the early signs that Africans are now beginning to realize that our strength is in our unity, and that therefore we must move with a deliberate agenda of having a political federation and ultimately economic integration and, of course, social cohesion, so that we have an Africa that is diverse but recognizes and emphasizes the things that bring us together in an effective manner. It's not going to be easy. It is not for the faint-hearted, because there are those outside of the continent who think that Africa can only be exploited if she is divided into smaller units. So we are going to face very many headwinds. There are also those within the African continent themselves who think they can only be big fish in small ponds, and therefore when you talk about a big Africa, they think that their position and
that was going to be
will
my
be
point.
undermined.
Yes.
So they'll speak about African unity, but they'll work to undermine African unity. And that is why it saddens me to see what is happening in South Africa, that South Africans are saying that their brethren in Africa have no space and opportunity in that country. They need Africa. They have over 120 companies which are operating in the continent of Africa, and it is in their best interest that their country becomes open. The borders that we have are artificial borders imposed on us in Berlin in 1884, 1885, and the fact that we have them is something that we should not worry about. Look at the country, your language here in Chichewa, one of the languages here. If you look at Chichewa and Chinyanja in Zambia, the same language. You go to South Africa, you find Tswana, you in Botswana, you find Swati in Swazi, in Eswatini, you go to Lesotho and you go to Lesotho, you go to the Shoshangane and you listen to Zulu, you go to my own East Africa, you find the Chaga and the Kikuyu, you find the Luos and you find the Tesos, you find the Maasai, you go to West Africa and you find the Yoruba, and you find them in Benin, you go to Sierra Leone, you find the Mende and the Temne, you go to Nigeria, you find the Fulfude and the Hausa, and all these people are separated by artificial boundaries, and we are saying we had better dissolve these boundaries so that they remain there only as useful for administration.
We have found ourselves in very interesting times. The former president of Malawi, Dr. Bakiri Muluzi, has been answering a court case over stolen public funds for many years now. I think most people have actually forgotten about it. And it's not the first time. Every time an African leader falls or something unfortunate happens, there are always revelations about them having looted some public funds or things like that. But some are still ruling right now, and there are all these stories that come up. What separates us from other countries is that in other countries and in other cultures, when people think some people don't trust them anymore, they resign. Not a very common thing in Africa.
Not very common. Is a culture. I think it is a political culture that people must develop over the years. The problem in Africa is that there is no shortage of individuals when you are in position of power who treat you like a demigod.
Yes.
And when you are treated like a demigod for too long, you begin to think that you are God and that you can do no wrong. The difference in other parts of the world over the years through historical experience is that they have known that if they don't hold themselves accountable, the people can rise against them. You look at Europe.
Yes.
The reason why Europeans behave the way they do is there was a time when across Europe they beheaded kings.
Oh yeah,
yes.
The other time they killed and actually they killed him and ate him.
Yes. So in Africa, we have not had that. And I think that that is part of the reason why that culture has not quite developed in a manner that we would love. But I've seen South Africa, to their credit, have done things that are to be admired. I mean, the recall, and I never liked this, the recall of President Thabo Mbeki was, and the recall of Jacob Zuma was something that stood out. And we have seen even in Zimbabwe, whether you call it a coup d'etat or you don't call it a coup d'etat, but there was some active measures, and President Mugabe was removed from office. I personally in 2014 did say of President Mugabe that he had great independence fighting credentials, but no matter how good a dancer you are, you must know when to leave the stage, otherwise you'll be removed without ceremony from the stage. And my prediction came true, although I'm not a Jewish prophet, but it did come true. So I believe that we must develop that culture. And it is also true that whenever you resign from office, it's not because of personal guilt, but it's taking moral responsibility. Moral responsibility is simply suggests that you don't chicken out simply because allegations have been made against you. Because when you are in political office, there are also people who are looking for fault on a daily basis.
But of course.
Yes, on a daily basis. You can do no wrong, no right in their eyes. Whatever you do is wrong. But you've got to look at certain critical issues and make a decision to leave office when it is in the best interest of the nation. I was very impressed by the administration in Ethiopia, Haile Desalegn, when he resigned, a young person, and said, for the general interest of the country and for the country's unity, I'm leaving office, and a new prime minister came into office, and that prime minister has been, in my view, trying to do very good and admirable things. I think that a few things are happening, but it's not easy. It's not a culture that we have developed in this part of the world, and perhaps as we grow a little and as people become more aware, demands will be made of the leaders, and they will see the wisdom of leaving when it is right.